My fiancée mocked my salary in front of her friends after I funded most wedding costs, so I canceled everything quietly, and her family now regrets everything. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and for most of my life, I believe trust and loyalty were everything in a relationship. When I met Mia, I thought I'd found someone who shared those values, or at least, I wanted to believe that. She was smart, ambitious, and charming in a way that made me feel like I'd won the lottery, and I fell hard. Over the last couple of years, I've quietly covered bills she couldn't handle, helped consolidate her lingering debts, and taken on most of the wedding expenses myself because I genuinely wanted her to have the life she dreamed of. Every little detail, from the venue to the catering, even the centerpieces, was carefully planned and paid for, often at the cost of my own weekend getaways or savings. I justified it to myself as love. I told myself that sacrifice was part of being a partner. At first, Mia seemed genuinely grateful. She would occasionally squeeze my hand and whisper, "You're amazing, you know that?" I'd smile, feeling proud, imagining our friends and families marveling at how perfect we were together. But subtle things started creeping in. Little jokes she made when I insisted on paying for an extra bouquet or an upgraded cake tier. "You're too generous sometimes," she'd laugh, a tone in her voice that made me shrug it off. I thought it was playful, a way of teasing me, but there was a faint edge I ignored. A few friends dropped casual warnings here and there. "Be careful, man. She's kind of materialistic." One of them said once over drinks, but I laughed it off. "Nah, she's different. You don't understand. I know her," I said, proud of my judgment and our relationship. I wanted to trust my instincts, and I wanted to believe the love I felt was enough to overlook little quirks. Then one evening, Mia casually mentioned she had a big girls' night coming up with her friends. She smiled, playful yet cryptic. I felt a swell of pride, thinking about how much effort I'd put in and how happy she'd be showing off our plans, completely unaware that this seemingly innocent night might be the first hint of the disrespect waiting to unfold. After that night, I dove headfirst into finalizing the wedding plans, convinced everything was falling perfectly into place. I spent evenings reviewing contracts, confirming deposits, and tweaking guest lists, making sure every detail was flawless. I even upgraded the lighting at the venue and splurged a little on custom floral arrangements, things I knew Mia would love. I told myself it wasn't about the money. It was about seeing her smile and hearing her say, "This is perfect." And for a while, she did say that, brushing her hair back and leaning into me with that soft look in her eyes that used to melt me entirely. But cracks started showing in ways I couldn't ignore. During one lunch with her friends, a comment slipped out, casual but cutting. "Wow, I can't believe you're letting him pay for all this. You could have had someone richer." The words sank like a punch to the stomach. I forced a laugh, but inside, my chest tightened. Was she joking, or was there a hidden edge I hadn't noticed before? I brushed it off again, telling myself it was just nerves or maybe her friend's influence. Later that evening, as we went over the seating chart in our tiny apartment, she smirked while pointing at a section of the guest list. "Do you really think anyone will notice you spent your entire salary on this?" she teased. I felt a flicker of unease, but shook it off. Her voice was light. The apartment smelled faintly of jasmine from the candles I'd bought, and I wanted to believe she was just being playful. I convinced myself she wouldn't ever intentionally hurt me. Still, the little things began piling up, subtle digs, the offhand comparisons to wealthier ex-boyfriends or friends' partners, the way she'd laugh a bit too hard at jokes about guys who pay for everything. Friends' warnings replayed in my mind like a broken record, but I pushed them away. I wanted to trust her. I had to. Then, one Friday night, she excitedly told me she was planning an extra-long girls' night with her friends, hinting it was going to be something really fun. I smiled, proud that all my efforts were paying off, completely blind to the fact that this night would quietly mark the beginning of my unraveling. The night of her girls' night arrived, and I watched Mia leave with that bright, excited energy I used to adore. She grabbed her purse, smirked at me, and said, "Don't worry, I'll bring backstories." The apartment suddenly felt too quiet, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, and I sank into the couch thinking about how much I'd invested. Not just money, but every ounce of effort, every plan meticulously laid out. I told myself she deserved this, that her happiness was worth it, and that I was the luckiest guy alive. Around midnight, her phone buzzed constantly, and I couldn't help but peek. A string of messages from her friends mentioned places, drinks, and, oddly enough, her talking about me in ways that made my stomach knot. Lines like, "He's sweet, but imagine if he made as much as my cousin," and "I can't believe he's paying for the wedding. That's kind of pathetic," scrolled across the screen. I froze. My hands went numb, and the living room suddenly felt colder. I wanted to scream, to call her out, but a voice in my head whispered, "Maybe it's just teasing. Maybe I'm overreacting." By the time she returned, the apartment smelled faintly of the perfume she always wore, clashing with the remnants of the jasmine candles I'd lit earlier. She walked in smiling, recounting every moment, completely oblivious to the tension curling inside me. "You wouldn't believe what I got up to," she said, laughing, tossing her jacket onto the chair. I forced a laugh, trying to mask the storm in my chest, while every joke she made about my poor salary and all the money I was throwing at this wedding scraped at my pride like sandpaper. I tried to push the humiliation aside, telling myself it was just her social side showing, but the gnawing feeling wouldn't leave. Friends' warnings, the subtle digs over the past few weeks, and now this blatant belittling. It all collided into a heavy weight pressing on my chest. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, realizing for the first time that maybe this wasn't playful teasing. Maybe the person I loved and trusted most was quietly undermining me, and I had no idea how deep it went. The next morning, the apartment felt different, heavier somehow. I poured my coffee and sat by the window, sunlight cutting through the blinds and stripes across the floor, but it did nothing to lighten the weight on my chest. I replayed last night over and over in my head. The laughter, the way Mia casually joked about my salary in front of her friends, the subtle smirk when she mentioned all the money I'd spent. I wanted to tell myself it was harmless, that I was just being too sensitive, but a pit had formed in my stomach, gnawing at me. I started noticing patterns I'd ignored before. She'd casually request last-minute upgrades for the wedding, always with a playful excuse. "It'll just be a tiny extra thing, don't worry." And somehow, every tiny extra thing came with a price tag I was covering. I remembered a friend's warning from weeks ago. "She's smart, but she knows how to take advantage of generosity." I brushed it off then. Now, the words echoed in my mind with the weight of truth. That afternoon, I tried to bring it up gently, hoping I was just misreading things. "Mia, do you think maybe some of the comments from last night went too far?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. She laughed, brushing my concern aside. "Oh, come on, you know I was joking. Don't be so serious." Her perfume lingered as she leaned over, brushing my shoulder with a playful smile, but I felt none of the warmth I used to. Even the apartment, usually cozy and comforting, seemed to close in around me. The faint hum of traffic outside felt distant, and the smell of coffee no longer soothed me. Every small interaction with her now had an edge I couldn't ignore. The way she'd casually mention friends with wealthier partners, or joke about men who pay for everything, while smirking in a way that made me question my own worth. By evening, I found myself scrolling through texts she'd sent during that girls' night, each line a tiny dagger of humiliation I hadn't fully processed. I realized with a sinking feeling that her behavior wasn't accidental or playful. It was deliberate, calculated, and somehow aimed right at me. And for the first time, I wondered how far this disrespect would go before I finally had to stop pretending it didn't hurt. Over the next few days, the tension between us started to feel suffocating. Mia's behavior became sharper, though she still wore that playful mask in front of friends. She would casually complain about small wedding details, but her words often had a sting. "I mean, it's cute that you picked that, but, well, you know, someone else might have done better," she said one afternoon, sipping her latte while I stared silently at the screen of my laptop. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of frustration, embarrassment, and disbelief washing over me. Every ounce of effort I had poured into this wedding, every sacrifice, suddenly felt invisible. Friends started reaching out more seriously this time. "Dude, she's doing more than teasing. She's belittling you." One text read, and another said, "I know it's hard to see now, but you're letting her walk over you." I kept ignoring them, telling myself I knew Mia better than anyone else. I wanted to believe her love was real, that all of this was just stress and nerves. But deep down, a nagging thought kept circling. Am I being played? The apartment, usually my sanctuary after work, began to feel like a trap. The faint scent of jasmine from the candles I'd bought mingled with the lingering perfume Mia left behind, and I noticed how quiet the space had become when she wasn't there. Even her laughter, which I used to crave, now carried a hollow edge in my memory. That evening, she brought up her friends again. "We're planning another girls' night. You don't mind, right?" "I know you've got work," she said, smiling sweetly, but the words felt like a challenge more than a question. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside I was boiling. I could feel my patience thinning, the walls of my pride starting to crack. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, running through every joke, every subtle dig, every comparison she'd ever made. I realized this wasn't just playful teasing anymore. It was a pattern, and I was caught in it. And for the first time, I wondered if I'd been completely blind to who Mia really was. It all came to a head one Friday night, and I'll never forget it. Mia had invited a few of her friends over to finalize some wedding details, but I quickly realized it wasn't just a casual gathering. I walked into the living room and immediately felt the tension, like static electricity in the air, my chest tightening as I noticed the way her friends' eyes lingered on me. "So he's paying for everything, huh?" one of them said, barely hiding a smirk. I laughed nervously, thinking maybe I was overreacting. And then Mia dropped it. She tilted her head, smiled at her friends, and said loud enough for me to hear clearly, "Yeah, he's sweet. But can you believe he actually earns this much? It's adorable, right? I mean, I don't know how he even manages to fund all this." Her laughter rang through the apartment, sharp and deliberate, while I froze in disbelief. Every muscle in my body tensed. I could feel the blood drain from my face, my pride unraveling faster than I could process. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to demand she stop, but no words came out. The apartment smelled faintly of wine and Mia's perfume, the city lights casting shadows across the walls, and the scene felt surreal, like I was watching someone else humiliate me in slow motion. My mind raced, replaying every joke she'd ever made about my salary, the subtle digs I'd dismissed as playful, the offhand comments about wealthier men she could have been with. For the first time, I realized I hadn't been imagining it. She wasn't just teasing. She had been systematically undermining me in front of the people she cared about most. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I could have expected. I excused myself under the pretense of grabbing another drink, hands shaking, stomach nodding, and my heart pounding like I'd been running a marathon. Sitting alone in the kitchen, I replayed the scene over and over. That's when it hit me. Everything I had done, every sacrifice, every plan, every penny I'd spent, she'd been mocking me quietly all along. I knew, in that moment, that nothing could go back to the way it was. And the realization left me with a cold, heavy certainty. I had to do something, anything, to reclaim control. The next few days were unbearable. Every time Mia smiled at me, I felt like it carried a hidden edge, a reminder of that night. I started noticing all the little things I'd ignored before. The way she casually mentioned friends with wealthier partners, the subtle smirks when I brought up our wedding plans, even the way she'd roll her eyes at my suggestions. It was like a slow drip of poison I hadn't realized I was drinking. Friends began texting me relentlessly. "You really need to wake up, man," one said. "This isn't just joking around. She's manipulating you." Another sent screenshots from her social media, subtle comments about men who pay for everything, and I felt my stomach twist. I wanted to ignore them, to tell myself I knew Mia better, but a creeping doubt had taken root, and it wouldn't go away. That evening, Mia asked me to review some last-minute details for the wedding, acting as if everything was normal. I watched her move through the apartment, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the leftover jasmine from my candles, and I felt an unfamiliar chill. Her laugh, which used to make my chest warm, now grated on my nerves. I realized I was constantly walking on eggshells, measuring every word, every gesture, afraid of another subtle insult or joke at my expense. I tried to confront her gently, just enough to gauge her reaction. "Mia, I feel like sometimes I'm being made fun of, even if it's not intentional," I said, my voice low. She tilted her head, flashing that infuriating smile. "Come on, you're overthinking. You know I'm just joking, right?" Her tone was light, but the words stung sharper than any harsh argument. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the city lights spilling through the blinds like cold, accusing eyes. I realized the pattern was real, deliberate, and escalating. And for the first time, I understood that this wasn't just playful teasing or stress. It was a quiet, calculated attempt to undermine me. I didn't know how far she would go, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. Something had to change. It hit me like a punch I couldn't dodge. One evening, Mia posted pictures on social media from yet another girls' night. Captions full of laughter and little digs I couldn't ignore. "He's so sweet, funding everything for me. Isn't that adorable?" I scrolled through them in disbelief, heart sinking with every line. My chest tightened, stomach churning, and I felt the world shrink around me. The apartment, once my sanctuary, now smelled like the faint perfume she'd worn that night, mocking me silently. Even the soft hum of traffic outside seemed to echo the humiliation I was drowning in. I called one of my closest friends, voice shaking. "Dude, I think she's making a joke out of me in front of everyone. I can't even explain how awful it feels." They were stunned, telling me, "This isn't just teasing. She's been doing this the whole time. You need to see it for what it is." But hearing it out loud didn't help. In fact, it made it worse, confirming the truth I'd been avoiding. That night, I sat alone on the couch, the city lights casting long shadows across the room. My hands shook as I replayed every moment, every subtle joke, every casual insult, every comparison to wealthier men. Everything I had done to make her happy, every penny I'd spent, every sleepless night planning the wedding. It all felt meaningless, worthless, like I had been living in a fantasy while she quietly mocked me. I felt crushed, humiliated, and completely powerless. The love I had thought was real now felt like a weapon she had used against me. My mind raced with anger, disbelief, and sorrow, all tangled together in a knot I couldn't untangle. I finally understood something I'd been avoiding for months. Nothing I had done mattered to her. And in that moment, I knew I had hit my absolute rock bottom. But amidst that pain, a single thought began to form, a quiet, dangerous resolve. If she thought she could humiliate me without consequence, she was about to learn how wrong she was. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The humiliation, the mockery, the endless subtle digs, it had to stop. I went over the wedding plans one last time, staring at the invoices, contracts, and deposits I had painstakingly managed. Each one felt heavier than the last, a reminder of how much I had given while being quietly laughed at behind my back. I made a decision then and there. I was canceling the wedding. Not with drama, not with shouting, but quietly, decisively, and completely on my terms. I contacted the venue first, explaining that unforeseen circumstances had forced us to cancel. I reached out to the caterer, the florist, the photographer. Every vendor got a calm, polite message. No blame, no explanation beyond the bare minimum. I wanted to ensure that Mia and her friends, the very people who had mocked me, would never get the satisfaction of a public confrontation. When Mia found out, she froze. Her phone buzzed incessantly with confirmations of cancellations, and she looked at me as if the world had just shifted under her feet. "Wait, what? How could you?" she stammered, panic rising in her voice. I just stared back calmly, letting the weight of the silence speak for me. I didn't need to argue or explain. The look on her face said it all. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of relief, a lightness I hadn't experienced since the first playful digs began. The apartment, though still faintly scented with her perfume and my leftover jasmine candles, felt like mine again. I could breathe, and as I watched her struggle to process what I had done, I realized something profound. My quiet, deliberate action had given me back the control she had been quietly eroding. That night, I lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, heart still pounding, adrenaline slowly ebbing. A part of me was scared of what would come next, her reaction, her family's reaction, but another part felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, power. And I knew this was only the beginning. It didn't take long for her family to catch wind of what had happened. I got a call that evening from her father, his voice sharp and incredulous. "We need to talk. What are you doing? This wedding, everything, why would you cancel it?" I could hear Mia in the background, whispering, panicked, clearly trying to grab the phone. I stayed calm, letting him vent while I silently collected my thoughts. When I finally spoke, I laid everything out calmly, methodically. "I've been funding the majority of this wedding, paying off debts, and doing everything I could to make this work. But over time, Mia has mocked me in front of her friends, belittled my efforts, and shown a consistent lack of respect. I cannot and will not continue to allow that in my life. My voice was steady, but every word carried the weight of weeks of humiliation, betrayal, and disappointment. Mia tried to interrupt, her voice rising in panic. "You're lying. You're blowing this out of proportion." I held up my hand, silencing her without a word. I calmly presented the texts, the social media posts, every subtle jab I had documented, letting the evidence speak for itself. Her parents were silent for a moment, shock spreading across their faces as they realized the truth. They had backed a daughter who had quietly humiliated the man supporting her entire wedding. The apartment felt tense, the air heavy with unspoken realization. The faint hum of traffic outside contrasted with the pounding of my own heartbeat. I could see the regret flicker in Mia's eyes, the realization dawning that her carefully constructed social image had crumbled instantly. When her father finally spoke again, it was quieter this time, almost defeated. We didn't know. I let it hang in the air. I didn't need their forgiveness. I didn't need their approval. The power had shifted, and for the first time, I felt completely untouchable. But even as relief washed over me, a small voice inside reminded me, this wasn't the end. There were still consequences to come, and I had to be ready for whatever Mia and her family might try next. After the confrontation with her family, I knew I didn't need to act out in anger to get my point across. The power wasn't in shouting or creating drama. It was in letting consequences quietly unfold. I focused on my own life, reclaiming my finances, my time, and my dignity. I stopped responding to Mia's frantic calls and messages, leaving her to deal with the aftermath of the wedding cancellations she had taken for granted. Meanwhile, I began noticing subtle shifts in her social circle. Friends who once laughed at my expense started asking questions, curious about why the wedding had disappeared overnight. Wait, she made him pay for everything, and she mocked him. I overheard snippets through mutual friends. I didn't need to explain anything. Her own words and actions had already done the work. Her parents, too, were caught off guard. The panic in their eyes was evident when I visited to collect some personal items, and Mia tried to smooth things over. "You're overreacting," she whispered, desperate, but I smiled calmly and shook my head. I didn't need to argue. The evidence, the embarrassment, and the social realization had already shifted the entire narrative. For the first time in months, I felt free. The apartment smelled faintly of fresh coffee instead of her perfume, and the city outside seemed less oppressive. I could breathe, think clearly, and focus on myself without the constant anxiety of someone quietly undermining me. As I watched her scramble socially, trying to explain away the gaps in her story, I realized something deeply satisfying. Mia's pride and carefully crafted image were unraveling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her friends were beginning to see the truth. Her family was shaken, and I was untouchable, not through aggression, but through quiet, deliberate control. I sat back that night, sipping a glass of water, letting the silence stretch around me. It was peaceful, empowering, and just. I didn't need revenge through anger, letting the truth speak, and watching her social and familial world quietly collapse was more satisfying than anything I could have done. Weeks passed, and life began to feel like it was finally mine again. I finalized my finances, untangling every wedding-related expense and making sure Mia couldn't leverage anything against me. The sense of control was intoxicating. For the first time in a long while, I could plan for myself without fear or anxiety, without constantly second-guessing someone else's intentions. Mia's social circle continued to crumble quietly around her. Friends who had once laughed at my expense began distancing themselves, subtly questioning her character. Her parents, too, had been forced to confront the reality of her behavior, and every interaction carried that awkward, regretful tension. I never gloated, never posted anything online. There was no need. The truth was already doing its work, and watching the consequences unfold without my interference felt sweeter than any confrontation could have. I spent more time on things that genuinely brought me joy, weekend trips, investing in hobbies I had neglected, and reconnecting with friends who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. The apartment, freshly cleaned and scented with coffee instead of jasmine, felt like a sanctuary once again. I could finally breathe without the weight of humiliation pressing down on me. Reflecting on everything, I realized the most important lesson. Boundaries are everything. Love isn't measured by money or sacrifice. It's measured by respect and reciprocity. Mia had taken advantage of my trust and generosity, but I had reclaimed my life not through rage, but through clarity, calm action, and unwavering self-respect. As I stood by the window that evening, looking out at the city lights stretching endlessly, I smiled quietly. There was no lingering resentment, only empowerment and peace. I had been tested, humiliated, and broken, but I had emerged stronger. And in that silence, I understood something crucial. Sometimes the best revenge isn't drama or confrontation. It's walking away, reclaiming your life, and letting the consequences of truth do the work for you. For the first time in months, I felt free, and that freedom was worth everything.